the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Hello, Sublation Media viewers. It's I, Douglas Lain, the head honcho here at Sublation Media, author of, Fall Into Time, which is a short story collection, and Wave of Mutilation, a novella. With me today, as always,
I'm Ashley Frawley. I'm a sociologist at the University of Kent. I'm the author of two books. First one's called Semiotics of Happiness, and the second is Significant Emotions, and lots of articles. I'm a regular media commentator on the radio and television, and I'm a columnist at Compact. And I'm also joining you in my pajamas, which I feel like I can get away with. I'm trying to take some time off this week, so pants optional, basically. And I was like, oh, should I put on a proper shirt or should I let the belly breathe? The belly breathing is what won today. But I thought, when the camera turned on, I thought I could just get away with these. Anyways, so today.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to mention something that is not on the subject of today's stream, but just to say this is the 1st of October. This is the month when we're going to be changing the tier structure on the Patreon. That will happen today. We are going to be asking everyone who's at the $5 level to please upgrade to the $10 level. A lot of people already have, and we're very grateful for that. If you get to the $10 level, you're going to get an audio book from our historical socialism line, which we just did a podcast about that yesterday. You're going to be getting all of the podcasts that we produce. You'll be invited to reading groups, and you'll also get access to a new podcast, which is coming out this month, the first one, which is basically called Reading the Left at the moment, where a group of us pick a book that's contemporary title on the left and discuss it for a couple of hours. You were part of that recording, Ashley. So This is a day to upgrade your tier level. I am going to make that officials. This is the last time the $5 level will get the Sublation magazine stream. So please do help us out. We need to get to a certain number in order to be solid and stable. We're really almost there because of everyone who already upgraded. But I'm just going to ask you all to do that today. Today we're going to be talking about thought taboos, cliches, the way that we appear to be kind of stuck in the past. But I'll let you introduce the topic from your perspective, and then I'll give my perspective.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ashley.
So first of all, I want to say, when you were talking about sort of upgrading, I have felt so alive lately when we do the Patreon stream. Right after this hour, we go to Patreon and we invite the patrons on to come and discuss. And there's just such a wonderful influx of new ideas. And it reminds me of back when I was doing my PhD. And it's crazy because you go into academia and you think, oh, that's when everyone's going to be talking about ideas. But no, there's no time to think about ideas when you are in academia. So it's just been really, really great. And it's just, reading things that I wouldn't have picked up on my own. And it's just been fantastic. And one of the things that I want to talk about more as we move forward is this idea of talking about the future and trying to move beyond the impasse, move beyond this void that people have been describing really since the fall of the Berlin Wall, that we are there's a sense of being stuck. And I always picture this in my mind. And in my book, the one that's just come out, I kind of constantly had this vision in the back of my head of this, of humanity kind of on the edge of a precipice or sort of staring down into this darkness, right? And it's this horrible void. And instead of Marshall Berman has this idea of all of the great philosophers, they all kind of saw this and they had tried to give us the courage to look through it, to try to see beyond it, but right now, instead of doing that, we are looking backward. So you have the right, which is, you're teetering over the edge of a cliff, and the right's looking back for a time when, maybe there was a point when we were on firm ground and everything was certain and it wasn't so scary. Well, why don't we just go back to that? And the left is digging their heels in as hard as they can and staring down at their feet. And there's some kind of backward looking leftism as well. But I feel like we're kind of stuck in the present. And when I saw you had put the title for this session, Why We Can No Longer Think About the Present, I was thinking, I don't think it's that we can't think about the presentist romanticism in our culture, that we have there's a backward look that kind of is leftish because it looks around in the past and like maybe Aristotle or for some virtues or some morals in order to kind of enchant the present, or to look to Buddhism, or to look to the East, the wisdom of the East, this sort of thing, to try to give the present meaning. So it's like you can avoid the void by trying to find some point in history where everything was okay, or you can try to find a nice cushy space in the void, where you can like meditate, you can make a home where you can live peacefully within that void. And nobody is searching along the horizon for some light. And I want to know how do we do that? And it seems to me that, I don't want to like wax existential on you guys or anything, but it's like all of our culture is engaged in this kind of bad faith, in the Sartrean sense of self-deception, right? Like instead of confronting this horrifying world where we have to make history, we have to do it. There's nothing else. We are like, oh no, it's not us, it's nature. And it's actually really, really bad that human beings have any control over the world because it's the Anthropocene, and the human hand on history is actually quite a bad thing. We should step back. And I feel like that's kind of a bad faith way of avoiding the incredible responsibility that humanity has over taking control of the future. And I feel that we're just kind of stuck, but I myself don't know how to move beyond that impasse.
Well, one of the ways that we're trying to get unstuck is by looking back, and it's another pitch here. Spencer Leonard is going to be joining us in the Parrot Room. So anyone who's watching now really ought to join us in the Parrot Room as we discuss Rousseau, which I think is a helpful thing to do right now. But I wanted to defend my title about not being able to think about the present, because one thing that I think that we are experiencing right now is on the level of culture, and on the level of like not just reason and rational thought or theorizing, but just on the level of our instinctual judgments and the way we interpret the world. We are somewhat stuck in the 20th century. That and I'll point to an experience I had recently when I went to the movies and watched some previews. Every preview that I saw for an upcoming movie featured music from either the 60s or the 70s, like late 60s or 70s. So there was a biopic about Bob Dylan, starring Timothy Chalamet, which just seems absurd to me. But on the other hand, I really want to see what they're going to try to do with this history. There was a Minecraft movie that was being advertised with a Beatles song, the Magical Mystery Tour. There was some like superhero movie that had Cat Stevens in the background, a remix of Cat Stevens in the background. And it just seems to me that we're stuck in the 60s and 70s when it comes to especially kind of understanding a utopian, progressive aspect of our culture. When we are going to be offered some hope, that hope comes in the form of a reference back to the 60s and 70s, and nothing contemporary. It seems to me, or quite often, it's not contemporary. So that's what I noticed today. But I want to put this in the context of my, pet obsession, which is the way in which the administrative state is attempting to quite literally clamp down on our imaginations and our free understanding and public reason, and put a stop to independent thought. And I have a clip that I want to share from. Let's see if I can. Here we go. This is John Kerry at the World Economic Forum, and tell me if you can hear it or not. Here it goes.
And I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's no, the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact are kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people go, and that people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change. Now, obviously, there are some people in our country who are prepared to implement change in other ways, and
so
that's
you're
really
questioning
dangerous.
really if democracy can survive unregulated social media.
I think democracies are very challenged right now, and have not proven they can move fast enough or big enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And to me, that is part of what this race, this election is all about. Will we break the fever in the United States?
Okay.
Oh gosh.
That,
Did you hear me go, oh no, oh no, it's getting so hard to govern. Can democracy survive the demos?
There was another clip. I don't think I heard it here, but he did say in that same presentation, the same panel discussion, that the First Amendment was a major stumbling block. Did I miss that this time and not hear him say it? But he did say it again here, because that he said the First Amendment stands as a major roadblock for us right now. And in this, did you hear that this time?
I don't remember. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. Let me run that. See if I can run it. Do people hear that? Oh yeah, people said yeah, you missed it. He did say it.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I was gobsmacked apparently.
So yeah, Kerry directly says in this that the First Amendment is a major roadblock for the Democratic Party's attempt to govern, and he also talks about the need to get rid of misinformation and sources that will mislead the public. So, yeah, it seems to me that there is an actual political effort to control our cognitive infrastructure, and that the Democrats are speaking quite plainly about this need. So we should.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely everywhere, and they feel what's scary is that they are so unembarrassed about it. I mean, I was just watching on Netflix. I fully interrupted you, Doug. Sorry. Could you?
No, it's okay. No, go on.
Before it.
No.
Sorry. I was just watching on Netflix, like Bill Gates in the future. I can't remember the name of the Netflix series where they like sit there with Bill Gates and like get, what's the future going to be like, blah blah blah, and they're just absolutely obsessed with misinformation, disinformation, and of course you got to wheel Lady Gaga out and she's gonna be like, yeah, like it's so hard. She wants to be seen as like an intellectual god. Anyway, but that's, and I think think it was at the World Economic Forum. They were all obsessed with misinformation and disinformation as well. So this is and it was very interesting too, because they are so unembarrassed about it that it really tells you that we all have a completely different understanding of what democracy is, right? And you could hear him when he said it. He said, winning enough votes to be free to make policy. You know what I mean? Like they see it as like winning that election gives you permission to do whatever you want from that point. It's like, oh, we got to get through this, get enough votes to get through this. We can do what we want. Essentially, that's like the extent of democracy for them. And the actual demos, the actual people having a say and being very rowdy and uppity and so on is so annoying, because it's getting harder and harder to just do that, because people are now, they know what's going on and they're talking about all of the issues. And I always say this, I'm sorry if it's cliche now, but it's a bit like they have this nostalgia, and Hillary Clinton is just the poster woman for this. They have this nostalgia for interest group democracy, where the demos is kind of sealed off. And the interest groups are the ones who engage in the democracy. And they think that was just the best form of democracy, which basically, it's like the NGO class gets the funding to do the research, to bring the issues to the government. But of course, it's like a revolving door between these interest groups and government officials. So you just have governments lobbying themselves for things that they want to do, with like the very slightest differences across the political spectrum. And things are changing now, and they do not like that. They do not like that. And they have not, I think, not only have mainstream parties not figured out a way through this, you have populists trying to like sort of ride the wave of the annoyance at those sort of, at the types that are longing for that past, when everybody just shut up and knew it was good for them. So populists currently are sort of riding that wave, but you don't have any kind of serious politics that's capable of making sense of this moment. It's all just this desperate longing for a time when you didn't have to listen.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's will be worth, like, I think, taking time to do some research and rethinking about the history, and let's say in the United States, the history of free speech and democratic participation in the United States, and in the different periods where the rights of the public have been suppressed directly, and what victories there have been, say, in the 20th century. I think I'm wondering if it looks like Ashley is frozen, but let's see if she drops away or not. But or if she comes back on. But I wanted to put all of this very obvious political suppression of speech, that the way the Democratic Party has set up institutions both in the United States through networks of NGOs and through the deep state, through organizations like CISA, agencies like CISA and the Department of Homeland Security and the CIA and the CDC. And I'm going to start singing a Beatles song in a second here. But in any case, that was that's all very obvious. But then there's this other question about how is this moment constraining our understanding or our imagination more broadly. And when I go to the movies, say, and see these contemporary, 2024 films that are aimed at audiences that were not around in the 60s and or 70s, they're not just aimed at boomers and Gen Xers, but at the millennials and the Zoomers and even whatever the next generation is, the alphas or whatever they're called. They nonetheless still reference back to the middle, and late 20th century culture, the New Left and the music of the New Left, in order to inspire hope and some sort of expansive utopian vision, like in a movie like Minecraft, which is presenting this artificial world as some wonder in the trailer, this boxy world, very cutesy and schmaltzy, sentimental world, but with the music of the Beatles, with the Magical Mystery Tour. So what I thought about was, first off, Adorno's critique of the culture industry, and how he argued that the culture has been commodified and through mass production in such a way as to promote passivity and to suppress active critical engagement with life. So he argued that mass-produced culture serves to reinforce the existing social order, creating a uniformity and, kind of a conformist culture, which doesn't quite ring true today in terms of conformity, because a lot of the ways in which people in the 20th century thought they had to behave in order to conform have changed. So we no longer conform by having a nuclear family, or you're back. Hi, Ashley.
Sorry.
But rather, or wearing a gray suit, or fedora, or having the right number of children and the picket fence, or going to church every Sunday. Those kinds of social conformity have dropped away, and the new social conformity is fundamentally different, or it has a different feeling. But I do think that there's some kind of aim, conscious or unconscious, spontaneously produced by capitalism through the market and commodification, or directed from the deep state, maybe obviously a combination of both, that is aimed at creating conformity, even as it presents, these films present kind of utopian visions.
Sorry, there were films that present utopian visions? Because I was gonna that seems to be an important bit that I missed.
Well, yeah, I think that like a film like the Minecraft movie is presenting an alternative reality, and is doing so in a way that is trying to inspire a sense of wonder in the audience, and making some sort of gesture towards a different basis for society and a more utopian world where people can realize themselves more fully. I get that all just from the preview. That seems to be there. And that's like reinforced by the Magical Mystery Tour soundtrack, which the Beatles produced, I think in 1967 or so. And, which was all about breaking free from conformity, going out on your own on a magical mystery tour, getting away from society as it is. And that's the gesture that the Minecraft movie, a movie that's definitely aimed at 12-year-olds, is, but also aimed at the adults who will take them, is making, I think.
Well, the reference to film kind of threw me for a loop, because what I was going to say before I dropped into the abyss, the deep state got me, was that I think so I wrote an article for Compact this week, which is why I'm resting. Every time that I write something, I need to it's like a bit of my soul to lay down for a day. Anyways, but it was such a difficult article to write, because I made a joke on Twitter. I was like, Trump, because there's no left, that now that the left has gone into the institutional mainstream, and so much of what had been the counterculture is now being institutionalized, what's the space for the counterculture? Point. I'm not the only one to make this point, but I was like, oh, Trump is just an avant-garde art piece. And I thought, there's something to this, because in New York at the moment, and apparently in Texas, when I was looking into it, I thought so strange. But there are all these sort of conservative movements that are they look a lot like those left-wing kind of subversive movements of the past, but they're right-wing. So there was an article in the Christian Chronicle or something can't remember, but that sort of featured this trans woman who plays the organ at a Catholic church, and wearing very expensive clothes, or very aristocratic kind of clothing, this sort of thing. And she explains, Oh yeah, it's Holy Week. It's a bit like Fashion Week for Catholics. And then she like goes off to some part of excuse me that I'm so uncool and definitely not a New Yorker or American at all. Some part of New York that's up and coming and very cool now, but it's all dominated by this like Catholic revival. And I found that very interesting, and I wanted to sort of reflect on this idea of like what happens when the right begins to occupy that space of countercultural rebellion. And I thought too, often one of the criticisms that I get, which I think is a little bit misplaced, and I realize more now after I actually tried to do it that it is misplaced, is that I'm always criticizing the left, right? But why don't I spend more time criticizing the right? And I thought, well, here I'll criticize the right. But I found it very difficult because it's a bit like screaming at a baby for not being able to talk. It's a baby. Like, what do you expect? Or like, or getting mad at a dog for having limited symbolic communication. That's way too mean on the right. That's not really what I mean. But what I mean is that's kind of what you expect. You expect the right to be backward looking. You expect the right not to have a vision for the future because that is not what they do. And so I found it very interesting that when they become that space for counterculture, then you have effectively nobody, not even in that kind of limited carnivalesque space that is even pretending to prefigure something in the future. We all become locked in this kind of nostalgia. And and I think because a lot of what passes for the left now is essentially backward looking and quite romantic, quite right wing in terms of the old sort of political spectrum of left and right from, going back to the French Revolution. There's this, Joseph de Maistre's line, like, man is too wicked to be free, has become a powerful prejudice across the political spectrum, where the left casts it as too vulnerable, perhaps requires protection, or perhaps too ecologically destructive to be free, requires these constraints. Whereas the right might cast it as something like human nature, or like, oh, it's just human nature, and it's just human nature to be greedy and acquisitive and to fight with each other, and ever it shall be. But this, it's just different washes of the same kind of underlying outlook. And when you have that, then you have a situation when there's nobody, not even in these like radical libertine, where it used to be these radical sort of libertine spaces, who is even prefiguring, however uselessly we used to do it, a kind of radical freedom in the future. And it strikes me that that whole side of the political spectrum has collapsed. And then there's nobody who's capable of pushing back against some of these authoritarian tendencies. You just get different washes. So the left wants to protect the vulnerable citizen from disinformation. I hesitate to say the left because I know there are good lefties out there. Hands up. I hope some of the people watching this, all the people watching this stream, we all recognize the power of humanity, and we want to use reason and move forward. We are inspired by the Enlightenment and want to understand why it's not possible to realize its dreams within capitalism. We are looking to the light on the horizon. But I think for the most part, the left hasn't been doing that for a really long time. Instead, they want to protect a vulnerable subject. And then the right is just looking to opportunistically stick it to them. So they will like sort of say, yes, oh, they're all anti-freedom, they're horrible, not at all, and we will carry the flag for freedom. But freedom is never safe in their hands, because it's simply opportunistic. They claim to be, on the side of freedom only because they are shut down by the left. And so, people who are disaffected get pushed over there. And then they find eventually, actually, no, as soon as they have the upper hand, that side will just try to crush the other. So they will, Trump will talk about the need to curtail the press just as much as the left will, or the mainstream political left will talk about needing to protect people from disinformation. And this is a very scary, very dangerous place to be in society, when there's no one capable of fighting for freedom, when no one is able to, you can say, oh, I believe in free speech, oh, I believe in freedom, but we obviously have to. And then it starts to erode. And it's quite an uneasy kind of political moment, where if you do have that kind of libertine spirit, if you do have that revolutionary spirit, and you're disgusted by what passes for the left and all this crap that's gone through institutions, where are you going to go? apparently to church.
Well, I want to throw this on the screen. It's from Spencer Leonard, who will, again, be joining us in the Parrot Room to discuss Rousseau. He says Daniel Defoe's novels were revolutionary and were very much commodified. And what he is telling me about my kind of very one-sided summary of Adorno, I want to maybe tell you about your fear of people going back to church. It seems to me that right now, throughout the United States anyway, and particularly perhaps on the right, but I think this is something that people on the left are picking up on too, is that there's a desire to return to everyday life after the pandemic. There's a desire to find a foundation for your life and your political action within your society, within civil society, within the normal institutions, rather than in relationship to the state, to build something, to touch grass and build something out in the world as it really exists, which means to return to society, to return to the people directing their own lives. And that is an impulse that's on what we think of as the right, and to some degree on the fringes of the left right now. And so when people are returning to church, that may be not to be the best approach from our perspective, but as socialists, but it does tell us something, that they're kind of acting on the general will of the moment, which is something we can get from Rousseau, which we'll just talk about in the second, in the Parrot Room. But there's a contradiction in these moments, even in the right, in the way that they are moving. They, on the one hand, they want to return to tradition and to the church and the power of Christian morality, but on the other hand, that same impulse is about empowering everyday people, finding the justification for society in society rather than in
a desire to be with other people as well, live for something beyond yourself in the present. Yeah, all of these things are good impulses.
Right. So then, to go back to my my example of these moments in the previews, with all these referencing back to the 60s, I think we should understand that as through the lens of Frederick Jameson, who just recently died, right? He had this idea that popular culture, while indeed being commodified and aiming at creating conditions of passivity and conformity, also had a utopian element to it, that there were, even within the constraints of like mass-produced entertainment, these utopian visions and desires for a different kind of society are often found, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes intentionally. So there's this latent element within our pop culture gesturing towards utopia. I would just say that today that latent element has grown stale to a large degree, that we're making a gesture towards old utopian visions that are copies of copies, rather than anything that's arriving out of this particular political moment or the general will of this time. And so that what we're seeing with the kind of hollowing out of Hollywood is the inability of the current established order to imagine enough utopian notions to create that consensus, to create a feeling of hope and desire within the spectators so that they would want to participate. This is what I'm speculating about this week after going to the movies. I'm such an old man, I very rarely get exposed to this stuff. But
well, I live in the middle of nowhere, so I can't even go to a movie if I wanted to, which is a shame. So the one of the other things that we were talking about this week in our sort of conversations with each other as we move through the week was you had talked about cliche.
Mm-hmm.
And I think cliche is also one of these ways that our culture kind of invites us to avoid thinking about the predicament of the present. It's and our way to move through this impasse. I've been struck recently by just how much our culture is dominated by cliche, and to a certain extent, this is like kind of inevitable. A lot of life just is, there's nothing new under the sun. It's hard to think of something, that no one's ever said before. Fine, okay, but what's interesting is, okay, internet discourse. Nobody's expecting it to be like, Plato's like dialogues or something. But it is governed so much by cliche. You notice if you go through like, every own on the internet, it's the same own again and again and again. And we even memify so much of our responses. And you put up a meme. You don't even need to say it. Every joke is the same. Oh, what a day to have eyes. This isn't the flex you think it is. It's all the same. Fine. For internet discourse, that's just the way that it is. It's not everybody's a fantastic writer. I struggle not to express myself in cliches quite a lot. Some things become cliches for a reason. They're quite clever and then they get a little old. And of course, cliche contains within it a kernel of truth. But the thing about cliche is that it's a distancing kind of mechanism. It's something that distances us from reality. And this is the way that Hannah Arendt talked about it. And obviously in Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she talks about, Adolf Eichmann, who's supposed to be, society has, and this whole trial has put Adolf Eichmann up as this symbol of Nazi evil. And she's laughing at him, like all through that book. Which was just started out as a series of articles, I think, in the New Yorker. She's like, she's ridiculing him, and she calls him. She says he's ridiculous, and she's expresses how he's just so unable to think for himself, and he expresses absolutely everything in cliche. So they ask, he says at one point, one thing that I've learned from this is I shall never take an oath. I will never take an oath. Nothing will happen on God's green earth that blah, blah, blah. No one can make me swear an oath. A little while later, they say, okay, well, you got to swear an oath or do something. And he's like, okay, I'll swear an oath. Just like that, very, very quickly. And at the end of his life, his very last words are a cliche. He says, I am no Christian, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, we will meet again. I shall never forget you. He's about to die, and he says he doesn't believe in the afterlife, but he can't think of anything else to say except what he's heard before. And Arendt says cliches distances us from reality because they give this semblance of truth. I've heard that before. I don't have to think about it. And so it allows us not to have to be truly engaged with reality. And there's a wonderful line that she uses. I actually have it in my podcast where I dealt a lot with my podcast from like 2 weeks ago on my channel, where I kind of went into some of this in a little bit more detail. But there's a wonderful line where she talks about how, very specifically, about how cliche function to stop Eichmann from dealing with the enormity of what was going on and what he had done and what he had been part of. And I think cliche functions in this way for us. So internet cliches, fine, but then they start to seep up into politics, right? It's fine to say that's a weird flex. I've heard it 1,000 times. Okay, on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. But for a politician to say weird flex, it's like Enlightenment man. And then we're like yelling internet cliches at each other. And you had mentioned like the way that nuclear war was being talked about was also steeped in cliche. And it distances us from the incredible profundity of our moment and the responsibility that we have. We just mock each other in cliches. So what was it about, nuclear policy that was also cliched?
Well, let's see if I can string my different ideas together. Jumping off of what you just said about cliches and get to the threat of nuclear war at the end. So this notion of a cliche, it could equally be attached to these false, stale, historically irrelevant utopian impulses that we see in popular culture. These are also cliches. It's a very unfortunate thing that might happen to a song that's worthy of preserving and understanding, like the Magical Mystery Tour, that it can be transformed into such an empty cliche in a preview for the Minecraft movie, right? But that happens. But what does it indicate? It means that we're distant from the present, in so much as we're distant from understanding the real contradictions that are going on in the present, where there might be something generative, something that would point us towards what could be or what ought to be, rather than simply what is. That the way in which utopian possibilities arise from the internal contradictions of our society, culturally and otherwise, that's no longer available to us, or isn't being generated by the culture industry in quite the same way as it might have been in the past, I think. That's my thesis anyway. And one of the reasons why might be because of the way the administrated society has mastered the creation of what the editors at Telos magazine called artificial negativity back in the 70s. So you would have a pseudo critique or a pseudo political movement for change that ultimately only reinforced the established order. I controversially claimed that the pro-Palestinian movement was such an artificially negative movement a few months back. Whether or not you agree with me about that, I do think that the way in which we're being presented with what ought to be in these various cultural products, like the Bob Dylan biopic or the Minecraft movie, has grown that those oughts are cliches and stale and artificial and are not connected to our actual society and the contradictions that are happening within it, but are spectacles, to use the Gita Board phrase instead. But to go to the nuclear war in a society which was engaged with the world that was actually going on, with reality on some level, with what is, we would have had places like the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and other news outlets report on Putin's threat to use nuclear weapons if NATO allowed Ukraine to use their weapons to launch long-range missiles into Russia. That any attack directly on Russian territory from NATO weapons would be considered an attack on the integrity of the nation and would warrant, as through Russian policy, a nuclear response. That's what he just said a little while ago. And we've been told that we are going to be providing Ukraine with these weapons. So it would, in a world that was functioning, that would at least be made, that information would be made public to the people. That would be made public. It would be something we would have to wrestle with and think about and determine the validity of. But the cliched response to it, when it has been reported at all, is just to characterize Putin's threat as empty bluster, bullying tactics, and so forth.
Yeah. Somebody, and I heard, as soon as I heard it, chills went down my spine. People were saying, it's just saber rattling. And I was like, oh no, I've heard that cliche before.
You know, the last time I heard it was right before the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as soon as somebody said that, I went, fuck. That's terrible. So there you go. Maybe cliche has some truth to it, in that the time that you heard someone use the cliche before, they were avoiding the depth of the reality of what might actually happen.
I mean, I don't know if Putin is bluffing or not, right? I can't tell. But this is being reported, when it is reported, only through this line. Putin is bluffing to get enough people worried such that the U.S. will back off. And, you know, I think that a more open press that would present that as one side or of an argument rather than the only way to even begin to conceive of the threat would be better for society. And I would even say that people like this trans woman who's playing the organ at a Catholic church to try to return to her Catholicism and find a new foundation for her life are, in a sense, trying to return to the values of an open, bourgeois, democratic society where there is such a thing as public reason, even if it's being done through this return to a kind of dogmatism.
Wait, hold on. Did you just say we need to return to bourgeois society? So I cut out for a moment there.
I said there is a desire for a return to the maybe a false picture of what bourgeois society was, but this idea of that comes from the bourgeois revolutions, that there should be such a thing as public reason, that society should be self-governing, and that the press's job is to inform the citizens about what's happening in the world in a way that is free from the dictates of the state and what the state's interests are. That, you know, that there's a desire to return to that notion.
Yes.
Even through a return to Catholicism. And you can see it in like someone like Sohrab Ahmari, who's a Catholic, but also really struggling after something bourgeois a good portion of the time.
And this is the interesting thing. And I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, which as I was writing that article for Compact, you know, I said the other day I write at about 40 words a minute, and I just have to accept that. So I have to give myself that much time so I don't pull all-nighters anymore. But the longer time I give myself, the more time I have for an existential crisis. I'm like, everything that I have to say is stupid. Everybody already knows this stuff. Why do I try? I should just crawl into a hole and die. Anyway, so I called my friend and I said, I have this idea for this article. Please tell me if I'm being an idiot here. And she's wonderful. She's one of the most intelligent people that I know. And she immediately, before I even said 2 words, started telling me that this is exactly what she had been thinking. And I was going to use this whole big existentialist framework. And she started to explain the same thesis to me, but using Freud. And I went, aha, I am onto something here. Because I didn't lie to myself through theory. But one of the things that she said was what these people want a lot of the time on the right, this sort of backward looking people who are looking for that time when everything worked, is they want capitalism to be what it said it was going to be. And that's what you're explaining now with bourgeois norms. Can't we just go back to these wonderful ideals of bourgeois society? Can't we go back to a time when, we could have a kind of, I don't know, civic society that was meaningful? Couldn't we just find that? Could we not, or go back to Adam Smith, if you want to be a libertarian or something like that? Couldn't we, go back to he's got it. That's how it should all work. They want capitalism to be what it says. But then she said something very interesting that really disturbed me. She said, in all these institutions, because she works in the arts world, they are all like that counterculture, as I mentioned toward the beginning of our episode, it had nowhere to go, right? This leftist counterculture, because it was so performative, so performatively subversive. You have a carnival against capitalism and you're just like, woo, dancing. You have no idea. If capitalism was like, well, shit, then I guess we'll head out, they'd be like, they wouldn't have a clue what to do with that situation, right? They might form some communes and then not figure out how to eat the next day. I don't know. I'm being flippant, but anyways, but so that all went into the institution. So it had nowhere to go. It went into the institution. So you get like DEI, you get people trying to like usualize and normalize identities and blah, 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 and teach that in the curriculum. And she says they truly believe the old idea from communism that capitalism will become communism of necessity. And I went, uh-oh. She said they think that that's what they're working toward, that if they just work hard enough, somehow, some way within those institutions, capitalism will begin to turn itself into communism. And they're at the forefront of this vanguard. And I went, oh my God, they're doing the same thing that the libertarians are doing. They want capitalism to be what Marxists said it was, which is that it contains in embryo communism. And they're wrong, because what they're doing is they're just trying to capture what it's all performative anyway. Even within institutions, they're trying to capture contracts and make jobs for themselves, make spaces for themselves. But I think that myself. Am I begging capitalism to be what it claimed to be from the leftist perspective? And am I wrong?
I listen, I don't think that we can simply create socialism, out of nothing. I do think that the task will be to try to ask of society, of capitalist society, that it achieves its ideological aims. And the question is, who's doing the asking? Because if it's just a bunch of PMC, petty bourgeois intellectuals making demands of the state to live up to a certain kind of equity, well, that can be arranged and rearranged and dealt with, and on some level achieved, and on some level be a failure over and over and over again forever. But when the foundation of society, the working class that actually sets up the terms of society, starts demanding that society achieve its ideological aims, then there's real power behind that, and there's a possibility that the workers organized politically together would take up the task of realizing the ought that's in capitalist society at the moment, politically and collectively. That's Marxism. That's what Marx was aiming to create. The dictatorship of the proletariat that would set the conditions where the working class could overcome itself. In an attempt to realize the norms of bourgeois society, they would overcome bourgeois society, to negate by taking up, by realizing. So, I mean, that is in theory the aim here. And when I work on something like, why are we still so stuck in the 60s counterculture culturally? Why does that keep returning as the background music for whatever disgusting technotopian vision that's going to be presented on screen? What I'm trying to work through is a cultural contradiction that might be where we might realize an ought out of the engagement with it. But I really can't do it just by going to the movies, like not on my own. And writing little clever critical cuts videos. It's good to do. I think it's helpful, but it's not going to ultimately do the trick. So organizing workers collectively, meaning the self-organization of workers, into their own institutions, I think is got to be the first step.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I was worried about, that perhaps I am also doing this. Through cliche, I am avoiding confronting what is. And my friend said, the trouble, Ashley, is that in order to be organized as a worker, you must be first a worker. And you must first have the privilege of being exploited. And increasingly, many of us do not have the privilege even of being exploited. The terrible, wonderful time of the workers all being gathered together, as Marx was saying, and capitalism's done this wonderful job of organizing the workers, tons of them under this roof. Is that so anymore? We are completely atomized. And I hesitate to say that Marx, never considered this. No, of course not. He talks about the rising organic composition of capital. He's quite aware of the situation in which workers would get pushed out of the process. But doesn't that, Spencer can shed some light on this in the Patreon. Does that not disempower us? Does that not ask and invite for some new kinds of thinking, some understanding of where we are, so that we can avoid cliche? And avoid confronting reality by taking refuge in cliches?
Yeah, well, this is maybe what we should take up in the parrot room. We've done just about an hour here, and I'm eager to have Spencer Leonard discuss Rousseau in the second half. But hopefully, by returning to Rousseau, we will avoid cliches in the parrot room. And I will be putting up a link to the Patreon so people can, join up and join the stream as well. There's a link to join the stream if you want to. And should we leave it there?
Sure. I just wanted to give some take-home messages.
Sure.
So yeah, join us on the Patreon, where we will talk about, and Spencer will help us think through, because Spencer knows, is quite an authority on Rousseau, but Spencer might be able to help us through how can we avoid cliche. Is it simply going back to cliche to say things like workers of the world unite? Do we have to go back to the drawing board? I'm waiting for all the angry people to tell me no. Anyway, but we talked about how we have a real problem. We are using all kinds of distancing mechanisms to stop us from thinking about reality, from facing the void. We're scared if we look into that blackness, it's going to look right back into our souls. But we have to be the one searching along the horizon for that little bit of light and head toward it. And that's what the best people throughout history have tried to do, and we need to be in that tradition. So join us on the Patreon where we talk about why and how.
All right, see you in the parrot room.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout,